Hi, I'm Professor Segrist. Welcome to Do the Right Thing. This is the first video lecture that you're going to view in the course. Today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the connection between religion and morality. And I'm going to do so by talking to you a little bit about the trial and death of the person of Socrates. So probably the most famous moment in the history of philosophy in the West is the trial and execution of Socrates. Socrates was a real person. He really existed in the 5th century BCE in Athens. And he really was put to death for practicing philosophy. It's a long story, but the short of it is that he was put to death for being an atheist. You see, Athens had just lost a very bloody and humiliating civil war with their arch-rival Sparta. When they lost the war, they also lost an empire that had sustained their wealth and power for generations. They were not happy with themselves, and they were looking for someone to blame. Now, Socrates was a middle-aged, middle-class man who liked to hang out with the young sons of the rich and the powerful. He would ask them lots of questions and encourage them to think for themselves. Importantly, he asked them to question the gods and the traditions and the values of their city. For example, Athenians really respected and revered their poets. But Socrates would go up to the poets, he would ask them to explain lines from their poems, and they would sound like fools. So he really disrespected them. Athenians were also very proud of their power, their wealth, and their military might. But Socrates questioned whether any of that was important, and the young men who followed began to question those too. More to the point, Athens was a very religious society. Now, this does not mean what we might take it to mean today. It was not dogmatic. There were not religious police or priests kind of watching everybody, making sure that you adhere to a specific ethical code. Ancient religions just weren't dogmatic in that way. Ancient religions were based upon rituals and traditions and feelings like piety, sacrifice, and deference. Now, it was important to Athenians that you honored and respected and felt like you were a part of the city and its way of life, and that you were proud of your ancestors and proud of your history. And the way that you showed that was through religion. Religion was the way that all of that civic identity, civic pride, civic belongingness, and civic responsibility came out. Well, after losing the war, it got into a lot of people's heads that maybe Athens lost the war because its young people had come to disrespect its traditions, values, and elders. In a word, because they had lost their religion. And they knew who to blame for this: Socrates. We're going to read something from Plato. Plato was a student of Socrates. He was one of the rich, young, and powerful men who followed Socrates around and would like to have philosophical discussions with him. Plato probably would have been destined for an important leadership role in Athenian society. His family was among the wealthiest and most politically connected in the whole city. But after Socrates was killed, he gave up on political life and devoted himself to philosophy. He became convinced that only philosophy could save Athens from itself. And so he wrote books, or rather what we call dialogues. One of the most famous is called Euthyphro. Now, all of Plato's dialogues are fictions, but they involve real people in Athens, and almost all were centered on the character of Socrates. In this dialogue, Euthyphro is a young man who is prosecuting his own father for murder. His father injured a slave and then left the slave to die. I know that we do not condone murder or slavery, and so we might see Euthyphro as a kind of moral hero, prosecuting his own father for what is right. But Greek moral life was centered around the family and around deference to elders. It was basically always wrong in a Greek worldview to disobey your elders, your parents, and to harm your family. And servants in the Greek mind just did not matter. And so to harm your elders, your father, for a person who had in a Greek mind, kind of no ethical standing, would have really been scandalous. So in the dialogue, Plato has Socrates chance upon a meeting with Euthyphro right before the court on the very day that Socrates is about to go on trial. And what I'm going to talk about from here is something called Euthyphro's dilemma. So Socrates and Euthyphro enter into a conversation. And the problem posed by Euthyphro when Socrates questions him is, what does it mean to be pious? Because Euthyphro thinks that what he's doing, prosecuting his father, he's doing for the sake of religion. He thinks that this is what his religion, his piety, requires him to do. So this is the dilemma that Socrates and Euthyphro end up in. So I want you to think about God and then think about what is morally good or right. Now, we know that it is wrong to lie and to cheat and to steal and to murder. And we know that it's good to be generous or kind or respectful and honest. And we also know that most religions say that God tells us not to lie, to cheat, to steal, or to murder. And most religions command us to be generous, kind, thoughtful, and honest. Well, think about those things that are good and those things that are bad. Are they good just because God says they're good? Or does God say they're good because, in fact, they are good? That's the dilemma. So let's think about the first part of the dilemma. This says that things are good or bad just because God says so. Well, this might mean that God could one day change their mind and say, you know what? It's okay to murder. And go ahead and lie and steal from each other and go ahead and cheat. Well, if God were to do those things, would those all become good? Because God now says they're good. Would we have to admire and emulate cheaters, fraudsters, liars, and murderers? Well, you can see the problem. If this part of the dilemma is true, then morality will appear to be completely arbitrary. There's nothing on this view about murder itself that we could study or philosophize about to see why it's wrong. It's not inherently wrong. It's only wrong because, for now at least, God says, don't do it, and he might change his mind. So if this is the case, the only way that we can achieve any kind of moral insight is to try to figure out what God wants us to do. But now consider the second part of the dilemma. In that case, lying, cheating, and stealing are wrong in themselves, and God commands us not to do them because they are wrong. In that case, knowing that God tells us not to do them does not tell us why they are wrong. So if we want to know that, we have to think more about them, and we have to try to understand them. In short, for the second part of the dilemma, we don't need God in the picture. We are capable of figuring out right and wrong for ourselves. This position is known as rationalism. It has been a powerful idea in philosophy ever since Socrates. An idea that says that we do not need God in order to know what is right and wrong and in order to be good people. In fact, it implies something stronger. By relying on religion, we fail to develop our own moral reasoning and insight into what is good and right. And so religion actually holds us back from being better people. That seems to have been the basis of Socrates' belief, and the reason that the profoundly religious Athenians put him to death. Before we leave that, however, I want you to consider this parting thought. Maybe being a good person is less about logical reasoning and more about connection, empathy, understanding, and community. Religion is a powerful force that binds humans together in these deeper emotional ways. And maybe it's even the only force that can do that. And if that's the case, then asking us to reject religion for the sake of our own logical reasoning ends up weakening or even extinguishing the kinds of connections and deep emotions that sustain our moral lives. And by doing so, might make us worse people.